The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, piercing the pre-dawn silence of Kandahar airfield like a blade through silk. Major Kalina, crosswind, Petrov adjusted her headset, her weathered hand steady despite the tremor in the transmission. The voice belonged to command, but something was wrong. The usual crisp military cadence had dissolved into something that sounded dangerously close to panic. All available aircraft, this is Control. We have a code black situation developing over Kabul. Repeat, code black. All pilots report to briefing room immediately. Code black. In 12 years of service, Kalina had never heard those words spoken aloud. She'd seen them in classified manuals, whispered about in the darkest corners of officer clubs, but never broadcast across an entire base. Her combat boots hit the tarmac with purpose as she sprinted toward the briefing room, her flight suit rustling against the Afghan night air. The briefing room buzzed with tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Pilots shuffled in their seats, eyes darting between the empty podium and the classified folders stacked like ammunition on the table. Colonel Marcus Webb entered with the gait of a man carrying the weight of an impossible decision. His usually immaculate uniform showed wrinkles, and his steel-gray eyes held something Kalina had never seen before: fear. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice hoarse, then caught himself. "Ladies and gentlemen." His gaze flickered to Kalina for a microsecond, a gesture that might have been apologetic under different circumstances. At 3:15 hours, we lost contact with Flight 447, a civilian passenger aircraft carrying 247 souls from Dubai to London. Last known position was 35,000 feet over the Hindu Kush. The room fell silent. Outside, the distant rumble of a supply convoy faded into nothing. Kalina's fingers tightened around her pen, knuckles white against the black plastic. "That's not the worst part," Webb continued, his words measured like artillery rounds. "Before contact was lost, the pilot transmitted a partial mayday. The aircraft's navigation system had been compromised. They were flying blind, heading directly toward Kabul International Airport." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "The plane is carrying enough fuel for another 4 hours of flight time." The mathematics were simple and terrifying. A fully loaded Boeing 777, lost in hostile airspace, with no navigation and enough fuel to reach any major population center in the region. Kalina's mind raced through the possibilities, each one worse than the last. "Intelligence suggests this was no accident," Webb said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This was an act of war." The room erupted in voices, questions, and half-formed strategies. But Kalina remained silent, her eyes fixed on the weather report taped to the briefing room wall. Wind conditions over the Hindu Kush were deteriorating rapidly. A storm system was moving in from the northwest, bringing with it the kind of weather that could turn a rescue mission into a suicide run. She raised her hand slowly, cutting through the chaos like a signal flare in the darkness. Thunder rolled across the mountains as the first drops of rain began to fall on the airfield. The storm was arriving ahead of schedule, and with it, the clock began ticking toward disaster. Major Kalina Petrov stood among her peers, but she stood alone. The sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, the way her fellow pilots seemed to unconsciously create distance between themselves and her, these were the invisible wounds of a career spent proving herself over and over again. "Crosswind has the most experience with mountain flying," Colonel Webb announced, his words cutting through the murmur of dissent that rippled through the room. "She's logged over 800 hours in the Hindu Kush alone." The statement hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, heavy with implication and challenge. Captain Rick Morrison, call sign Hammer, leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. "With all due respect, sir, this isn't about mountain flying. This is about combat effectiveness under extreme pressure." His eyes found Kalina's across the room. "We all know what happened in Helmand." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Helmand Province. The mission that had earned Kalina her distinguished flying cross and nearly ended her career simultaneously. The rescue of 14 wounded Marines from a hot landing zone, executed under enemy fire with a damaged rotor system and failing hydraulics. She'd brought them home, every single one of them, but the cost had been a $30 million helicopter and a reputation that followed her like a shadow. Hammer raises a valid point, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen interjected, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd climbed the ranks by stepping on others. Perhaps we should consider pilot psychological evaluations alongside technical expertise. Kalina's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. She'd learned long ago that defending herself in rooms like this only provided more ammunition for her critics. Instead, she focused on the tactical display screen showing the search grid over Afghanistan. Somewhere in that maze of mountains and valleys, 247 innocent people were flying blind toward an uncertain fate. "The weather window is closing," she said finally, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. "Every minute we spend debating qualifications is another minute those passengers are in danger." She stood, her frame smaller than most of the men in the room but somehow filling more space. "I volunteer for the mission." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the storm continued to build, wind howling across the airfield like the voices of the dead. Lightning illuminated the mountains in brief, stark flashes, revealing the treacherous terrain that awaited whoever accepted this mission. Colonel Webb studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Crosswind, you understand the risks. This isn't a rescue mission anymore. This is potentially a shoot-down order." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Kalina nodded slowly, understanding the full weight of what was being asked. If Flight 447 couldn't be safely diverted, if the passengers and crew had been compromised, if the aircraft posed a threat to civilian populations below, she might be ordered to destroy it. "I understand, sir," she replied, her voice unwavering. "I accept the mission." The pre-flight briefing lasted exactly 18 minutes, but each second felt like an eternity as Kalina absorbed the classified intelligence reports. The Boeing 777 had vanished from radar at 35,000 feet, its last known heading taking it directly toward the Kabul metropolitan area. With nearly 2 million civilians in the potential impact zone, the stakes couldn't have been higher. "Intel suggests the aircraft's navigation system was compromised by sophisticated electronic warfare," briefed Major Williams, the base intelligence officer. His face was pale, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd been awake for days. "The hijackers, if that's what they are, used a zero-day exploit to gain access to the flight management system." Kalina studied the tactical display, her mind calculating intercept vectors and fuel consumption rates. The mathematics were unforgiving. Her F-16 Fighting Falcon, call sign Viper 21, had enough fuel for approximately 90 minutes of flight time. In that window, she had to locate a missing aircraft in some of the most treacherous airspace in the world, establish visual contact, and determine friend from foe. "Rules of engagement?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would be complicated. Colonel Webb's expression was grim. "You are authorized to use all necessary force to protect civilian populations. Priority 1 is establishing communication with the aircraft. Priority 2 is escorting it to a secure landing zone. Priority 3, he paused, the weight of command heavy in his voice. Priority 3 is neutralizing the threat by any means necessary." The euphemism hung in the air like cordite. Neutralizing the threat meant shooting down a passenger aircraft with 247 innocent people aboard. It meant becoming the executioner of men, women, and children, whose only crime was buying a ticket on the wrong flight. "Understood, sir," Kalina replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was being asked. She'd signed up to protect innocent lives, not to end them. But sometimes, in the cruel mathematics of warfare, saving many meant sacrificing few. The walk to her aircraft felt like a death march. Ground crews scurried around Viper 21, conducting pre-flight checks with unusual intensity. Her crew chief, Master Sergeant Lopez, approached with her helmet and flight gear, his weathered face showing concern. "She's ready to fly, Major," he said, handing her the equipment. "Full combat load, extra fuel tanks, and I've triple-checked every system." He paused, studying her face. "You sure about this, Crosswind? Weather's getting worse and—" He gestured toward the mountains, where lightning continued to flash like artillery fire. "I'm sure, Chief," she replied, pulling on her helmet. The familiar weight of it felt comforting, like putting on armor before battle. "Take care of things while I'm gone." As she climbed into the cockpit of Viper 21, Kalina felt the aircraft embrace her like an old friend. The controls were familiar under her hands, the displays and instruments arranged exactly as she'd configured them over hundreds of flights. This was her domain, her sanctuary, the one place where her gender, her size, and her past mistakes didn't matter. The engine spooled up with a satisfying roar, drowning out the storm outside. She ran through her pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision, each item confirmed and verified. But as she prepared to taxi to the runway, a new voice crackled through her headset. "Viper 21, this is Overlord. Are you ready to copy additional intelligence?" The radio transmission that followed would change everything. Hidden within the static and interference, Kalina heard something that made her blood run cold. The missing aircraft wasn't just lost, it was being remotely controlled. Someone, somewhere, was flying Flight 447 by wire, using the passengers as human shields while they guided the aircraft toward an unknown target. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the voice in the background of the hijacker's transmission, a voice speaking in accented English with a phrase that chilled her to the bone. "Phase 1 complete. Proceeding to primary target." Phase 1, which meant this wasn't the end of the operation, it was just the beginning. As Kalina's F-16 rolled down the runway and lifted into the storm-darkened sky, she realized she wasn't just hunting a hijacked aircraft. She was racing against time to prevent something far worse than a single plane crash. The question was, what was the primary target, and did she have enough fuel to reach it before 247 innocent people became martyrs in someone else's war? Lightning flashed across her canopy as she climbed through the storm, the aircraft shuddering against the turbulence. In the distance, the Hindu Kush mountains loomed like the teeth of some ancient beast, waiting to devour anyone foolish enough to challenge them. The hunt had begun. Viper 21 punched through the storm clouds at 15,000 feet, emerging into a moonlit sky that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Below, the Afghan landscape rolled away in waves of shadow and silver, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Kalina's radar screen showed nothing but empty airspace, but she knew the Boeing 777 was out there somewhere, carrying its human cargo toward an uncertain fate. "Overlord, this is Viper 21. I'm airborne and proceeding to search Grid Alpha 7. Request updated intel on target aircraft." The response came through layers of encryption and static. "Viper 21, Overlord. No radar contact at this time. Last known position was Grid November 4, heading 270 degrees. Be advised, civilian air traffic has been suspended in the entire region." Kalina banked left, following the projected flight path of the missing aircraft. The silence in her headset was deafening, no radio chatter, no routine transmissions, nothing but the steady hum of her engines and the occasional crackle of atmospheric interference. It was as if the entire sky had been evacuated, leaving her alone to hunt ghosts. Her RWR, radar warning receiver, began to chirp softly, indicating electronic surveillance somewhere in the distance. Not hostile, but definitely military. Someone else was out here, watching, waiting. The knowledge that she wasn't truly alone should have been comforting, but instead it only added to the pressure. How many people were monitoring her radio frequency right now? How many careers would be ended if she made the wrong decision? Viper 21, this is Reaper 6. I've got eyes on you from Angels 30. The voice belonged to a pilot she'd never met, but the call sign was familiar. Reaper 6 was an E-3 Sentry AWACS aircraft, flying high above the battlefield to provide radar coverage and command coordination. Knowing they were watching gave her some comfort, but also meant every move she made was being recorded and analyzed. Reaper 6, Viper 21, copy your position, any contacts on the target aircraft. Negative, Viper 21, but we're picking up intermittent radar returns from Grid Oscar 3. Could be your bird, but the signature is unusual. Unusual. In military speak, that single word could mean anything from equipment malfunction to active electronic countermeasures. Kalina adjusted her heading toward Oscar 3, her thumb hovering over the master arm switch that would activate her weapons systems. The landscape below began to change as she flew deeper into the mountains. The smooth hills of the foothills gave way to jagged peaks and deep valleys, terrain that could hide an army or swallow an aircraft without a trace. Her altitude was 25,000 feet, but some of the peaks below reached nearly as high, their snow-covered summits gleaming in the moonlight like knife blades. Viper 21, Overlord. Be advised, we're receiving reports of unusual radio transmissions from the target aircraft. Intelligence is analyzing, but initial assessment suggests the hijackers are communicating with an unknown third party. The implication was clear. This wasn't a simple hijacking. Someone was coordinating this operation from the outside, using the passenger aircraft as a weapon in a larger plan. Kalina's mind raced through the possibilities. A terrorist attack on Kabul International Airport, a suicide mission against a high-value target, or something worse. Her radar screen flickered, showing a momentary contact at the edge of her detection range. There, Grid Oscar 3, just as Reaper 6 had indicated. But as quickly as it appeared, the contact vanished, leaving only empty airspace and unanswered questions. Reaper 6, Viper 21. I'm showing intermittent radar contact, bearing 090 degrees, range approximately 40 nautical miles. Can you confirm? Viper 21, Reaper 6. Confirmed. We're tracking the same contact, but it's exhibiting stealth characteristics. Recommend you proceed with extreme caution. Stealth characteristics. A Boeing 777 wasn't designed for stealth, but sophisticated electronic countermeasures could create the same effect. Someone had spent considerable resources preparing this operation, which meant the stakes were higher than anyone had initially realized. As Kalina flew toward the intermittent radar contact, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was flying into a trap. The missing aircraft, the electronic warfare, the carefully coordinated timing, it all pointed to something far more sophisticated than a simple hijacking. But what? The answer came in the form of another radio transmission, this one broadcast in the clear on an emergency frequency. The voice was calm, professional, and utterly chilling in its matter-of-fact delivery. To all concerned parties, Phase 2 will commence in 30 minutes. Recommend immediate evacuation of all civilian populations within a 50-kilometer radius of Kabul International Airport. This is not a drill. This is not a negotiation. This is a promise. The transmission ended with a click, leaving Kalina alone, with the terrible knowledge that she was no longer hunting a hijacked aircraft. She was racing against time to prevent a catastrophe that could claim thousands of innocent lives. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, 247 passengers were flying unknowingly toward their fate, their aircraft transformed into a weapon of mass destruction. The hunt had become a race against time, and the clock was ticking toward zero. At 26,000 feet above the Hindu Kush, Kalina's radar screen came alive with a contact that made her heart race. The Boeing 777 materialized on her display like a ghost becoming solid, its transponder squawking an emergency code that sent chills down her spine. The aircraft was flying erratically, gaining and losing altitude in a pattern that suggested either severe mechanical problems or active pilot resistance. Overlord Viper 21. I have radar contact with the target aircraft. Range 12 nautical miles, bearing 045 degrees. The aircraft appears to be in distress. The response came immediately. Viper 21, Overlord. Acknowledged. Attempt to establish visual contact and assess the situation. Use extreme caution. We're detecting active jamming in your area. Kalina pushed her throttles forward, closing the distance rapidly. The F-16 responded like a thoroughbred, its General Electric F-110 engine producing 29,000 pounds of thrust that pressed her back into her ejection seat. The familiar sensation of acceleration was comforting, a reminder that she was in control of one of the most sophisticated weapons systems ever created. As the range closed to 5 nautical miles, she began to make out details on her radar screen. The Boeing 777 was flying at 18,000 feet, well below its normal cruising altitude, and its flight path was becoming increasingly erratic. Whatever was happening aboard that aircraft, it wasn't normal. Viper 21, this is Reaper 6. We're detecting multiple radio transmissions from the target aircraft. Sounds like there's a struggle in the cockpit. The words hit Kalina like a physical blow. A struggle in the cockpit meant the flight crew was still alive, still fighting for control of their aircraft. It also meant that any decision to shoot down the plane would be tantamount to murdering innocent people who were trying to save themselves. At 3 nautical miles, the Boeing 777 came into visual range. Through her heads-up display, Kalina could see the massive aircraft silhouetted against the moonlit sky, its navigation lights blinking in the standard pattern. From this distance, it looked normal, peaceful even. But she knew appearances could be deceiving. Target aircraft. This is United States Air Force fighter aircraft on your 6 o'clock position. Identify yourself and respond to my instructions. The radio remained silent for several seconds, then crackled to life with a voice that was clearly struggling for control. Air Force aircraft, this is Flight 447. We have a situation aboard. Our navigation systems have been compromised. We're flying blind. The voice belonged to a pilot, but it was strained, desperate. In the background, Kalina could hear other voices, shouting in a language she didn't recognize. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by static. Flight 447, this is Viper 21. I need you to follow my instructions exactly. Turn left heading 270 degrees and begin a descent to flight level 150. I will escort you to a secure landing zone. The response came not from the pilot, but from another voice entirely, calm, cold, and speaking in accented English. United States aircraft, you will not interfere with this flight. Any attempt to divert or land this aircraft will result in immediate detonation of explosive devices aboard. We have 247 passengers and crew as hostages. Kalina's blood ran cold. The hijackers weren't just using the aircraft as a weapon. They had turned the passengers into human shields. Any rescue attempt would risk triggering whatever explosives they had aboard, potentially killing everyone instantly. Overlord Viper 21. The aircraft is confirmed hostile. Hijackers claim to have explosives aboard and are threatening to detonate if we interfere. The silence that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds, but it felt like hours. When Colonel Webb's voice finally came through her headset, it carried the weight of impossible decisions. Viper 21, Overlord. Rules of engagement are now weapons-free. You are authorized to engage the target if it poses a threat to civilian populations. Weapons-free. The 2 words that every fighter pilot dreaded hearing. They meant the safety protocols were off. The The mission had escalated beyond rescue, and she was now authorized to kill 247 innocent people to save potentially thousands more. Kalina's finger found the master arm switch, hovering over it without making contact. The Boeing 777 continued its erratic flight path ahead of her, its massive bulk seeming to fill the entire sky. Inside that aircraft were men, women, and children who had simply wanted to travel from one place to another. They didn't deserve to die for someone else's political agenda. But if she didn't act, if the hijackers succeeded in their plan, how many more innocent people would die? The mathematics of warfare were brutal and unforgiving, but sometimes the only way to save lives was to take them. Flight 447, this is Viper 21. I'm ordering you to turn left heading 270 degrees immediately. If you do not comply, I will be forced to engage. The response came as expected. You will not fire upon this aircraft. To do so would be to murder innocent civilians. The blood of 247 souls will be on your hands. Kalina closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of every decision she'd made that led to this moment. When she opened them again, her finger was still hovering over the master arm switch, and the Boeing 777 was still flying toward its unknown target. The choice was hers alone, and time was running out. The Boeing 777 banked sharply to the right, its massive wings catching the moonlight as it deviated from Kalina's ordered heading. The aircraft was now flying directly toward the Kabul metropolitan area, its 247 passengers and crew unwitting participants in what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated terrorist attack. Viper 21, this is Overlord. Intel indicates the target aircraft is now heading directly toward Kabul International Airport. ETA approximately 23 minutes. You are cleared to engage. Kalina's thumb moved to the master arm switch, the action purely instinctive. But as she prepared to flip the switch that would activate her weapon systems, something made her hesitate. The Boeing 777's flight path was erratic, inconsistent with the smooth, determined approach she would expect from hijackers flying toward a target. Reaper 6, Viper 21. Can you confirm the target aircraft's exact heading? I'm seeing course corrections that don't match a direct approach to Kabul International. Viper 21, Reaper 6. Confirmed. The aircraft is deviating from a direct course, but general heading remains toward the airport. We're also detecting increased radio traffic from the cockpit. Increased radio traffic. That meant the struggle for control was intensifying, which gave Kalina an idea. Instead of shooting down the aircraft, perhaps she could help the flight crew regain control. It was a long shot, but it was better than mass murder. Flight 447, this is Viper 21. I'm going to try to help you regain control of your aircraft. Is your pilot still alive? The response came through layers of static and interference. Viper 21, this is Captain Morrison, aircraft commander of Flight 447. We're alive, but the hijackers have overridden our flight controls. They're using some kind of electronic system to control the aircraft remotely. Remote control. That explained the erratic flight path and the intermittent radar signature. Someone on the ground was flying the Boeing 777 by wire, using the passengers as human shields while they guided the aircraft toward its target. Captain Morrison, Viper 21, I need you to try to access your emergency flight controls. The mechanical backup systems should be unaffected by electronic interference. Viper 21, we've tried that. The hijackers have disabled the mechanical systems as well. They've thought of everything. Kalina's mind raced through the possibilities. If the flight crew couldn't regain control of the aircraft, and if the hijackers were determined to use it as a weapon, then her only option was to shoot it down. But there had to be another way. There always was. Overlord, Viper 21. Request permission to attempt a close formation intercept. I might be able to force the aircraft to deviate from its course through aerodynamic interference. The silence that followed was deafening. What she was proposing was incredibly dangerous, flying her F-16 in close formation with a much larger aircraft, using her jet wash and wingtip vortices to disrupt the Boeing 777's flight path. One miscalculation, one moment of turbulence, and both aircraft would be destroyed. Viper 21, Overlord, request denied. The risk is too great. You are ordered to engage the target aircraft with missiles. The order was clear and unambiguous. Kalina's finger moved to the master arm switch, but something in Captain Morrison's voice made her pause. He was still fighting, still trying to save his passengers. Could she really abandon him now? Flight 447, Viper 21. I'm going to try one more thing. When I give the word, I need you to try to regain control of your aircraft. I'm going to create a distraction. Before anyone could respond, Kalina banked hard left and positioned her F-16 directly in front of the Boeing 777, close enough that her jet wash would affect the larger aircraft's flight path. The maneuver was dangerous, bordering on suicidal, but it was the only option she had left. The Boeing 777 bucked and rolled as it flew through the turbulent air behind Kalina's fighter, its massive frame shuddering under the aerodynamic forces. For a moment, the aircraft deviated from its course, banking away from Kabul International Airport. Now Captain Morrison tried to regain control now. But as the words left her mouth, Kalina's radar warning receiver exploded with alerts. Someone was targeting her with a surface-to-air missile system, and the launch signature was coming from directly below. The hijackers had backup support on the ground, and they were about to turn her rescue attempt into a death trap. The SAM launch warning screamed through Kalina's headset like a banshee, its urgent tone cutting through every other sound in the cockpit. Her training kicked in immediately. She banked hard right and deployed chaff, filling the sky with metallic strips designed to confuse enemy radar systems. The surface-to-air missile streaked past her canopy, its proximity close enough that she could see the exhaust trail. Viper 21 is taking fire. SAM launch from Grid Papa 7. I'm defensive. The radio erupted with voices as her near-miss triggered responses from multiple aircraft. Somewhere above, the E-3 Sentry was coordinating a response, while attack aircraft moved into position to engage the ground-based threat. But Kalina's immediate concern was the Boeing 777, which had resumed its heading toward Kabul International Airport. Flight 447, this is Viper 21. Did you regain any control during the maneuver? Captain Morrison's voice came through the static, strained but determined. Viper 21, we had partial control for maybe 10 seconds. The electronic override system reset itself, but we were able to see the control inputs. Someone on the ground is flying this aircraft manually. Manual control from the ground meant there was a human operator somewhere below. Someone with enough skill to fly a Boeing 777 remotely while coordinating surface-to-air missile attacks. This wasn't a simple terrorist operation. It was a sophisticated military assault using civilian aircraft as weapons. Reaper 6, Viper 21. I need immediate intel on ground-based control systems in the area. Someone down there is flying the Boeing 777 by remote control. Viper 21, Reaper 6. We're detecting multiple electronic warfare signatures from the valley below your position. Looks like a mobile command post with military-grade equipment. A mobile command post. That meant the people controlling Flight 447 were professionals, possibly military personnel operating under the cover of a terrorist attack. The implications were staggering. If a nation-state was behind this operation, shooting down the aircraft could trigger an international incident. But if she didn't act, 247 innocent people would die, and potentially thousands more on the ground. The mathematics of warfare were cruel and unforgiving, but the choice was still hers to make. Overlord Viper 21. Request permission to engage the ground-based command post. If we can destroy their control systems, the flight crew might be able to regain control of the aircraft. The response came through layers of command authority. Viper 21, Overlord. Negative. Your mission is to engage the target aircraft, not to conduct ground attacks. You are running low on fuel and need to make a decision. Low on fuel. Kalina checked her fuel gauge and felt her heart sink. She had approximately 15 minutes of flight time remaining, barely enough to escort the Boeing 777 to its destination or to engage it with missiles. The window for a ground attack was closing rapidly. Flight 447, Viper 21. I need to know your exact passenger count and fuel remaining. This information is critical for my decision. Captain Morrison's response was immediate. Viper 21, we're carrying 247 passengers and crew. Fuel remaining is approximately 2 hours. The hijackers have indicated they plan to use the aircraft as a weapon against Kabul International Airport. 2 hours of fuel. That meant the Boeing 777 could reach any target in the region, not just Kabul. The attack on the airport might be a diversion, designed to draw attention away from the real target. But what could be more important than the largest airport in Afghanistan? The answer came in the form of another transmission, this one broadcast in the clear on an emergency frequency. Phase 3 will commence in 18 minutes. All personnel are advised to evacuate the American Embassy compound immediately. This is not a drill. The American Embassy. Not the airport, the embassy. The Boeing 777 was heading toward a building full of American diplomats, intelligence officers, and support staff. The death toll would be catastrophic, and the political implications would be even worse. Kalina's finger moved to the master arm switch as she realized the horrible truth. She wasn't just being asked to shoot down a hijacked aircraft. She was being asked to prevent an act of war that could destabilize the entire region. The choice was no longer about saving 247 lives versus thousands on the ground. It was about preventing a catastrophe that could kill thousands and start a war that would kill millions. Her thumb hovered over the switch as the Boeing 777 continued its relentless approach toward Kabul, its passengers unaware that their fate rested in the hands of a pilot they would never meet. Time was running out, and the hardest decision of her career was waiting. The Boeing 777 was now 12 nautical miles from Kabul International Airport, but Kalina's radar screen showed something that made her blood run cold. The aircraft was descending rapidly, dropping from 18,000 feet to 15,000 feet in a matter of minutes. This wasn't the gradual descent of an aircraft preparing to land. This was the aggressive dive of a weapon preparing to strike. Overlord Viper 21. Target aircraft is in a rapid descent, rate of descent approximately 3,000 feet per minute. This is consistent with a terminal attack profile. The response came immediately. Viper 21, Overlord. You are authorized to engage with AIM-120 AMRAAM. Repeat, you are weapons free. Kalina's finger moved to the master arm switch, but as she prepared to flip it, Captain Morrison's voice crackled through her headset. Viper 21, this is Flight 447. We've regained partial control of the aircraft. The hijackers are trying to override us, but we're fighting them. Partial control. That meant the flight crew was still alive, still fighting for their passengers' lives. Could she really shoot down an aircraft whose crew was actively trying to save themselves? Flight 447, this is Viper 21. Can you level off? Can you gain altitude? Viper 21, we're trying, but the electronic systems keep overriding our inputs. We need more time. Time? The one thing Kalina didn't have. Her fuel gauge showed 8 minutes of flight time remaining, barely enough to complete the intercept and return to base. If she was going to act, it had to be now. Reaper 6, Viper 21. I need an immediate assessment of the ground-based command post. If I can eliminate their control systems, the flight crew might be able to save the aircraft. Viper 21, Reaper 6. The command post is located in a valley approximately 15 nautical miles southwest of your position. But be advised, your fuel state is critical. You don't have enough fuel for a ground attack and a return to base. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. She could either shoot down the Boeing 777 and return to base, or she could attack the command post and sacrifice herself in the process. Either way, her career as a pilot would be over. But as she looked at the Boeing 777 on her radar screen, still fighting against the electronic override systems, she realized that some things were more important than careers. Sometimes, the only way to save lives was to risk your own. Overlord, Viper 21. I'm going to attempt to destroy the ground-based command post. If I can eliminate their control systems, the flight crew can regain control of the aircraft. The silence that followed was deafening. When Colonel Webb's voice finally came through her headset, it carried the weight of a man who understood the sacrifice she was making. Viper 21, Overlord. You don't have enough fuel for that mission. You'll never make it back to base. Understood, sir. But 247 people will make it home to their families. Kalina banked hard left, diving toward the valley where the command post was located. Her radar screen showed the Boeing 777 continuing its descent, but the rate had decreased slightly. The flight crew was still fighting, still trying to save their passengers. As she approached the valley, her RWR exploded with alerts. The command post was defended by multiple surface-to-air missile systems, and they were all targeting her aircraft. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore, it was a suicide run. But as she armed her AGM-88 HARM missiles and prepared to engage the electronic warfare systems below, Kalina felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in her career, she wasn't fighting for promotion or recognition or the approval of her peers. She was fighting for something far more important: the lives of innocent people who deserved to see another sunrise. The valley below erupted in electronic warfare as her HARM missiles found their targets. The command post's radar systems died one by one, their electronic signatures vanishing from her display like candles being extinguished. But the surface-to-air missiles were still launching, their exhaust trails streaking through the night sky like deadly fireworks. Viper 21, this is Flight 447. We're regaining control. The electronic override systems are failing. Captain Morrison's voice cut through the chaos, filled with hope for the first time since the ordeal began. On her radar screen, Kalina could see the Boeing 777 beginning to level off, its descent rate decreasing as the flight crew fought to regain control of their aircraft. Flight 447, this is Viper 21. Can you climb? Can you gain altitude and turn away from Kabul? Viper 21, we're trying, but we've lost hydraulic pressure. We can control the aircraft, but we're limited in our maneuvering capability. Limited maneuvering capability. That meant the Boeing 777 was still heading toward Kabul, but at a much reduced rate of descent. The flight crew had bought themselves time, but they hadn't eliminated the threat entirely. Kalina's fuel gauge showed 4 minutes of flight time remaining. She had enough fuel to escort the Boeing 777 away from populated areas, but not enough to return to base. The choice was simple. She could save 247 lives and sacrifice her own, or she could abandon the mission and try to save herself. Overlord, Viper 21. I'm going to escort the target aircraft away from populated areas. My fuel state is critical, but I can buy them enough time to find a safe place to land. The response came immediately. Viper 21, Overlord, negative, return to base immediately. Your fuel state is too low for continued operations. But Kalina was already banking toward the Boeing 777, her F-16 sliding into formation beside the much larger aircraft. Through her canopy, she could see the passenger windows, each one representing a life that hung in the balance. Children, parents, grandparents, all of them depending on her to make the right choice. Flight 447, this is Viper 21. I'm going to escort you to a safe landing zone. Follow my lead and maintain current heading. As she led the Boeing 777 away from Kabul, Kalina's radio crackled with transmissions from multiple aircraft. Search and rescue helicopters were being scrambled, tanker aircraft were being repositioned, and emergency landing fields were being prepared. The entire theater of operations was mobilizing to save the lives of 247 passengers and one fighter pilot who had chosen duty over self-preservation. But as her fuel gauge approached zero, Kalina realized that her sacrifice might not be enough. The Boeing 777 was still damaged, still struggling to maintain altitude. Even if she guided them to a safe landing zone, there was no guarantee they would survive the approach. Reaper 6, Viper 21. I need an immediate assessment of emergency landing fields within the target aircraft's range. They're going to need a long runway and full emergency services. Viper 21, Reaper 6. Bagram Airfield is your best option, bearing 045 degrees, range approximately 30 nautical miles. We're alerting emergency services now. 30 nautical miles. With her current fuel state, Kalina had enough for maybe 10 more minutes of flight time. She could escort the Boeing 777 partway to Bagram, but she wouldn't be able to see them safely on the ground. As her fuel warning light began flashing, Kalina made a decision that would define her legacy. Instead of abandoning the mission to save herself, she would stay with Flight 447 until the very end, using her aircraft as a beacon to guide them home. The choice had been made. Now all that remained was to see it through to the end. The Boeing 777 struggled through the night sky like a wounded bird, its massive frame shuddering with each gust of wind. Kalina flew alongside in close formation, her F-16's navigation lights serving as a beacon for the damaged airliner. Through her canopy, she could see the passenger windows, each one representing a life that hung in the balance. Flight 447, this is Viper 21. Bagram Airfield is bearing 045 degrees, range 25 nautical miles. Emergency services are standing by. Captain Morrison's voice came through the static, strained but determined. Viper 21, we're losing hydraulic pressure. The aircraft is becoming increasingly difficult to control. We may not make it to Bagram. The words hit Kalina like a physical blow. After everything they'd been through, after her sacrifice of fuel and ammunition to save them, the Boeing 777 might still crash. But she wasn't about to give up now. Flight 447, you're going to make it. I'll stay with you until you're on the ground. Her fuel gauge showed 2 minutes of flight time remaining. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. She had enough fuel to escort the Boeing 777 for perhaps 5 more nautical miles. Then she would have to eject and hope for the best. Overlord, Viper 21. I'm going to guide the target aircraft as far as possible toward Bagram. Request immediate search and rescue from my position. The response came through layers of static. Viper 21, Overlord. SAR helicopters are already airborne and proceeding to your position. You've done everything possible, Kalina. It's time to think about your own survival. Kalina. Colonel Webb had used her first name, something that had never happened in 12 years of service. The simple gesture carried more weight than any medal or commendation ever could. Flight 447, this is Viper 21. I'm going to have to leave you soon. My fuel is critically low. Viper 21, this is Captain Morrison. I want you to know that what you've done today will never be forgotten. You've saved 247 lives, and we'll make sure the world knows about it. The Boeing 777 was now visible on the horizon, its landing lights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Bagram Airfield was 15 nautical miles away, close enough that the damaged airliner might actually make it. Kalina's fuel warning system began chiming urgently, the sound cutting through her headset like an alarm clock. She had perhaps 90 seconds of flight time remaining, barely enough to clear the mountains below before her engines flamed out. Flight 447, this is Viper 21. I'm going to have to leave you now. Fly heading 045 degrees, maintain current altitude. Bagram is 12 nautical miles ahead. Viper 21, this is Flight 447. Thank you for everything. We'll see you on the ground. But as Kalina prepared to pull away from the Boeing 777, her radar screen showed something that made her heart race. Another aircraft was approaching from the northwest, its transponder squawking a hostile code. The hijackers had a backup plan, and they weren't about to let Flight 447 escape. Overlord Viper 21. I have a new contact, bearing 300 degrees, range 8 nautical miles. Transponder indicates hostile aircraft. The response came immediately. Viper 21, Overlord, confirmed hostile aircraft, but you're out of fuel and weapons. You need to eject immediately. Kalina looked at her fuel gauge, then at the Boeing 777 struggling through the darkness beside her. The hostile aircraft was closing rapidly, and she was the only thing standing between it and 247 innocent lives. Negative, Overlord. I'm staying with Flight 447. Her engines began to sputter as her fuel tanks ran dry. The F-16 shuddered and began to lose altitude, its sophisticated systems shutting down one by one. But even as her aircraft died around her, Kalina kept her eyes fixed on the hostile contact approaching from the northwest. Flight 447, this is Viper 21. There's another aircraft approaching your position. Take evasive action and get to Bagram as fast as possible. The Boeing 777 banked left, its massive frame responding sluggishly to the controls. But the hostile aircraft was faster, closing the distance rapidly. In seconds, it would be in weapons range. Kalina's engines finally flamed out completely, leaving her gliding through the night sky in a powerless aircraft. But even as she began to fall, she kept her radio active, guiding Flight 447 toward safety. Bagram Tower, this is Flight 447. We're 5 nautical miles out, declaring an emergency. We have a hostile aircraft in pursuit. The response came immediately. Flight 447, Bagram Tower. We have you on radar. Emergency services are standing by. Come straight in, runway 09. As Kalina's F-16 began its final descent toward the mountains below, she watched the Boeing 777 disappear into the distance, its passengers unaware that their lives had been saved by a pilot they would never meet. The hostile aircraft had broken off its pursuit, apparently unwilling to engage the heavily defended airfield. Her mission was complete. Flight 447 was safe, and 247 innocent lives had been saved. As she reached for her ejection handles, Kalina allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had done her duty, and she had done it well. The choice had been made, and she had chosen correctly. The ejection seat fired with explosive force, launching Kalina into the frigid night air at 8,000 feet above the Hindu Kush Mountains. The initial shock of the cold hit her like a physical blow, but her training took over immediately. She pulled her arms tight against her body, checked her altitude, and prepared for the parachute deployment that would save her life. The main chute deployed with a sharp crack, jerking her upward as the canopy filled with air. Below, the landscape was a patchwork of shadows and moonlight, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. She could see the lights of Bagram Airfield in the distance, where Flight 447 was hopefully making its emergency landing. Overlord, this is Viper 21. Chute deployed successfully. I'm approximately 5 nautical miles northwest of Bagram, descending through 6,000 feet. The response came through her survival radio. Viper 21, Overlord. SAR helicopters are en route to your position. ETA approximately 10 minutes. Are you injured? Negative, Overlord. I'm uninjured and have good chute. Landing zone appears to be a narrow valley with limited visibility. As she descended through the darkness, Kalina's mind drifted to the Boeing 777 and its 247 passengers. Had Captain Morrison managed to land safely? Were the passengers even aware of how close they'd come to disaster? She would probably never know, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were alive. Her boots touched down on rocky ground at the bottom of a narrow valley, the impact jarring but manageable. She quickly gathered her parachute and activated her emergency beacon, then settled in to wait for rescue. The silence of the mountains was profound, broken only by the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. Viper 21, this is Rescue 7. We have your beacon and are approximately 3 minutes out. Are you in a secure location? Rescue 7, this is Viper 21. I'm in a narrow valley with good concealment. No sign of hostile forces in the area. The HH-60 Pave Hawk appeared over the ridgeline like a mechanical angel, its searchlight cutting through the darkness. The rescue hoist descended slowly, and within minutes Kalina was being pulled up into the aircraft's cabin. The pararescueman who helped her aboard was grinning beneath his night vision goggles. "Ma'am, you're one hell of a pilot. Flight 447 landed safely at Bagram 15 minutes ago. All 247 passengers and crew are alive and uninjured." The words hit Kalina like a wave of relief. She had done it. Despite the impossible odds, despite the lack of fuel and weapons, despite the criticism and doubt from her peers, she had saved 247 innocent lives. As the helicopter flew toward Bagram Airfield, Kalina could see the Boeing 777 parked on the tarmac, surrounded by emergency vehicles and ground crews. The passengers were being evacuated through inflatable slides, their faces showing the confusion and relief of people who had survived something they didn't fully understand. Rescue 7, this is Overlord. Bring Viper 21 directly to the command post. We need a full debrief on the mission. But as the helicopter approached the airfield, Kalina saw something that made her smile. The ground crews were lining up along the taxiway, watching as the rescue helicopter brought her home. It wasn't a formal ceremony, but it was recognition from the people who mattered most, the men and women who kept the aircraft flying and the mission alive. The helicopter touched down gently, and Kalina stepped out onto the tarmac. The night air was cold, but she felt warm for the first time in hours. She had done her duty, and she had done it well. As she walked toward the command post, Captain Morrison appeared from the crowd of passengers and crew. His face was haggard, his uniform disheveled, but his eyes were bright with gratitude. "Major Petrov," he said, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you personally. What you did up there, it was beyond the call of duty." Kalina shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. "Just doing my job, Captain. I'm glad you made it down safely." "It was more than a job, Major. It was heroism of the highest order. My passengers and crew will never forget what you did for us." As Captain Morrison walked away, Kalina realized that something had changed. The sidelong glances from her fellow pilots were different now, not dismissive or condescending, but respectful. The whispered conversation stopped when she approached, not because she was unwelcome, but because she commanded respect. She had finally earned what she'd been fighting for her entire career, the recognition that she was more than just a female pilot. She was a warrior, a guardian, a protector of innocent lives, and that was worth more than any medal or promotion. The mission was over, but her legacy was just beginning. The debriefing room at Bagram Airfield was packed with personnel from multiple agencies and command levels. Kalina sat at the head of the table, still wearing her flight suit, answering questions from intelligence officers, mission commanders, and Pentagon officials who had joined via secure video link. The fluorescent lights were harsh after the moonlit cockpit, but her voice remained steady as she recounted the events of the mission. The hijackers demonstrated sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, she explained, her hands gesturing to illustrate tactical positions. They had remote control of the aircraft's flight systems, surface-to-air missile support, and what appeared to be military-grade communication equipment. This wasn't a traditional terrorist operation. Colonel Webb leaned forward, his expression grave. Major Petrov, in your professional opinion, what was the primary objective of this operation? Kalina paused, choosing her words carefully. Sir, I believe the attack on Flight 447 was designed to accomplish multiple objectives. First, to test our response capabilities. Second, to demonstrate that civilian aircraft could be weaponized using electronic warfare. And third, to gauge our willingness to shoot down a passenger plane with innocent civilians aboard. The room fell silent. The implications were staggering. If this had been a test run, what would the actual attack look like? And how many other aircraft might be vulnerable to similar electronic hijacking? The hostile aircraft that approached during the final phase of the mission, asked a voice from the Pentagon video link. Did you get a visual identification? Negative, sir. My aircraft was out of fuel and I was focused on guiding Flight 447 to safety. But the radar signature suggested a military fighter aircraft, possibly Russian or Chinese origin. More silence. Foreign military aircraft operating in Afghan airspace during a hijacking operation meant this incident had international implications that extended far beyond terrorism. Major Petrov, Colonel Webb said, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. What you accomplished tonight was extraordinary. You saved 247 civilian lives while operating under impossible conditions. Your actions reflect the highest traditions of the United States Air Force. The words should have felt like vindication, but Kalina felt only exhaustion. She had done what needed to be done, nothing more. The real heroes were Captain Morrison and his crew, who had fought to regain control of their aircraft while hijackers held guns to their heads. Sir, I was just doing my job. Any pilot in the squadron would have done the same. Colonel Webb's expression softened slightly. Major, I've been in the Air Force for 23 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did tonight. You sacrificed your aircraft and risked your life to save civilians. That's not just doing your job, that's heroism. As the formal debriefing concluded, Kalina found herself surrounded by personnel who wanted to shake her hand, pat her shoulder, or simply be near someone who had done something extraordinary. The attention was uncomfortable, but she recognized it as a turning point in her career. Major Williams, the intelligence officer, approached with a classified folder. Major Petrov, we've analyzed the electronic warfare signatures from the hijackers' equipment. The technology is more advanced than anything we've seen from traditional terrorist groups. We're going to need your detailed input for our threat assessment. Kalina nodded, understanding that her role in this incident was far from over. The intelligence community would want to debrief her extensively, and her testimony might influence national security policy for years to come. But as she walked out of the debriefing room, she encountered something that meant more than any intelligence assessment or policy briefing. The passengers from Flight 447 were waiting in the terminal, and when they saw her, they began to applaud. It wasn't a formal ceremony or an organized demonstration. It was simply 247 people who had been saved by a pilot they had never met, expressing their gratitude in the only way they could. Men, women, and children of all ages, all united by the shared experience of survival. An elderly woman approached her, tears streaming down her face. "You saved my grandson," she whispered. "He's only 8 years old and he gets to grow up because of what you did." Kalina knelt down to meet the woman's eyes. "Ma'am, I'm just glad everyone made it home safely. That's what matters." But as she stood up, she realized that the mission had changed her as much as it had changed the perceptions of others. She was no longer fighting for recognition or advancement. She was fighting for something much more important: the protection of innocent lives and the preservation of the values she had sworn to defend. The applause continued as she walked through the terminal, but Kalina barely heard it. Her mind was already focused on the next mission, the next challenge, the next opportunity to serve something greater than herself. The transformation was complete. She had become the pilot she had always been capable of being. 3 weeks after the Flight 447 incident, Kalina sat in a Pentagon conference room that smelled of coffee and tension. The walls were lined with maps of global conflict zones, and the table was covered with classified documents that would reshape American aviation security protocols. She was no longer just a pilot giving a debriefing. She was a key witness in congressional hearings and a consultant on new defensive systems. "Major Petrov," said Congressman Harrison, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, "your testimony suggests that our current aviation security measures are fundamentally inadequate against electronic warfare attacks. What specific recommendations do you have?" Kalina leaned forward, her voice clear and confident. "Sir, we need to develop aircraft that can operate independently of electronic flight control systems. The hijackers exploited our reliance on computerized navigation and autopilot systems. We need mechanical backup systems that can't be overridden remotely." The room buzzed with whispered conversations. Defense contractors, Pentagon officials, and congressional staffers all recognized the implications of her words. Billions of dollars would be needed to retrofit existing aircraft and develop new defensive technologies. "Major," interjected General Patterson from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, "are you suggesting that our entire commercial aviation fleet is vulnerable to this type of attack?" "Sir, Flight 447 was a proof of concept. The hijackers demonstrated that they could take control of a modern aircraft without setting foot on board. If they can do it to one plane, they can do it to any plane." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room understood that they were discussing a paradigm shift in aviation security, one that would require unprecedented cooperation between military and civilian agencies. After the hearing, Kalina found herself in the hallway with Colonel Webb, who had flown in from Afghanistan to support her testimony. His expression was a mixture of pride and concern. "How are you holding up, Major? The media attention has been intense." Kalina nodded, thinking about the countless interviews, photo shoots, and public appearances she'd endured over the past 3 weeks. "It's been overwhelming, sir, but if it helps prevent another Flight 447, it's worth it." "The Air Force is recommending you for the Air Force Cross," Webb said quietly. "It's well-deserved." The Air Force Cross was the service's second-highest decoration, awarded only for extraordinary heroism in combat. Kalina had dreamed of such recognition, but now that it was within reach, she felt only the weight of responsibility. "Sir, I appreciate the honor, but I hope people remember the real heroes, Captain Morrison and his crew, who fought to save their passengers while hijackers held weapons to their heads." Webb smiled. "That's exactly why you deserve the recognition, Major. You understand that heroism isn't about personal glory, it's about service to others." As they walked toward the Pentagon exit, Kalina's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Major Petrov, this is Captain Morrison. My daughter is getting married next month, and she insisted I invite the woman who saved her father's life. Would you be willing to attend? It would mean the world to our family." The message was simple, but it carried more weight than any military decoration. This was what her service was really about, not medals or promotions, but the opportunity to preserve families, protect communities, and ensure that innocent people could live their lives without fear. "Sir," she said to Colonel Webb, "I have a wedding to attend." He looked at her curiously, then smiled as she showed him the message. "That's an honor worth more than any medal, Major." As they stepped out into the Washington sunshine, Kalina realized that her transformation was complete. She was no longer the pilot who had to prove herself to skeptical colleagues. She was a guardian, a protector, a warrior who fought not for personal recognition, but for the preservation of innocent lives. The mission had changed her, but more importantly, it had revealed who she had always been capable of becoming. And that revelation would guide her for the rest of her career and beyond. The media attention surrounding Major Kalina Petrov intensified as more details of the Flight 447 incident were declassified. Aviation Week featured her on their cover with the headline, "The Pilot Who Rewrote the Rules of Engagement." CNN ran a primetime documentary called Crosswind, The Hero They Didn't See Coming. But the story that mattered most to Kalina appeared in a small Nebraska newspaper, written by the 8-year-old boy whose grandmother had thanked her at Bagram. "My Hero Pilot" was written in crayon with spelling errors, but it captured something that the professional journalists had missed. The simple truth that heroism wasn't about recognition or glory, but about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. The boy's letter was taped to her office wall at Peterson Air Force Base, where she had been assigned as a test pilot for the new electronic warfare countermeasures program. The irony wasn't lost on her. The mission that had nearly ended her career had actually launched her into the most important work of her life. "Major Petrov," called Colonel Sarah Chen, the program director, "we need your input on the new backup flight control systems. The contractors want to know if the mechanical overrides would have been effective against the Flight 447 hijackers." Kalina looked up from her desk, where she was reviewing test flight data from the latest prototype aircraft. The new systems were impressive, but she knew that technology alone wouldn't solve the problem. The real defense against electronic warfare was pilot training, situational awareness, and the courage to make difficult decisions under pressure. "The mechanical systems would have helped, but the real issue was communication," she replied. "Captain Morrison's crew knew their aircraft was compromised, but they couldn't effectively communicate with outside forces. We need better protocols for pilot-to-pilot communication during emergencies." Chen nodded, making notes on her tablet. "We're scheduling a test flight for next week. I want you to simulate the electronic warfare scenario and see if the new systems can maintain control." The test flight was classified, but Kalina knew it represented a fundamental shift in aviation security. The lessons learned from Flight 447 were being incorporated into both military and civilian aircraft, making the skis safer for everyone. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Captain Morrison. "Major, the wedding was beautiful. My daughter named her first dance Crosswind in your honor. Thank you for giving me the chance to walk her down the aisle." The message brought tears to her eyes. This was the real measure of her success, not the medals or the media attention, but the lives she had touched and the families she had preserved. Every mission, every test flight, every training session was ultimately about protecting people like Captain Morrison and his daughter. "Ma'am," said Lieutenant Torres, one of the new pilots assigned to the program, "I wanted to thank you for volunteering to be my mentor. It means a lot to have someone who understands what it's like to be underestimated." Kalina looked at the young pilot, seeing something of her younger self in Tor's determined expression. "Lieutenant, the most important thing I can teach you is that proving yourself never ends. Every mission is a chance to demonstrate your capabilities, but more importantly, it's a chance to serve something greater than yourself." As the weeks passed, Kalina found herself becoming not just a test pilot but a teacher, a mentor, and a symbol of what was possible when talent met opportunity. The doubters and critics from her early career had largely disappeared, replaced by colleagues who respected her expertise and valued her judgment. But the real transformation was internal. She no longer flew to prove herself to others, she flew to protect them. The mission had changed her perspective on everything from risk assessment to decision-making under pressure. She had learned that true courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. During a routine test flight, her radio crackled with a familiar voice. "Crosswind, this is Overlord. We have a situation developing over the Pacific. A commercial aircraft has reported navigation system problems, and we need your assessment." Kalina's hands tightened on the controls. Another electronic warfare incident, another opportunity to apply the lessons learned from Flight 447. But this time, she wasn't alone. The protocols she had helped develop were in place, the training she had provided was being implemented, and the technology she had tested was protecting innocent lives. "Overlord, this is Crosswind. I'm ready to assist." The mission never ended. It only evolved, grew, and demanded new levels of excellence. And Kalina Petrov was ready for whatever came next. The call came at 200 hours on a Tuesday morning in November. Kalina was at home in Colorado Springs, reviewing test flight data when her secure phone rang with the tone reserved for classified emergencies. The voice on the other end belonged to General Patterson, and his words chilled her to the bone. "Major Petrov, we have a situation developing over the North Pacific. A Boeing 787 with 312 passengers has reported complete navigation system failure. The aircraft is flying blind, and we're detecting electronic warfare signatures consistent with the Flight 447 incident." Kalina was already reaching for her flight suit before the general finished speaking. "Sir, what's the aircraft's position and fuel status?" "The aircraft is approximately 800 miles west of Seattle, fuel remaining for 6 hours. We're scrambling F-22 Raptors from Elmendorf, but we need someone with your experience to coordinate the intercept." 20 minutes later, Kalina was in the cockpit of a modified F-16, equipped with the latest electronic warfare countermeasures. The aircraft was a testbed for the new systems developed in response to Flight 447, and tonight it would get its first real-world trial. "Crosswind, this is Overlord. You're cleared for immediate departure. Weather over the Pacific is deteriorating, and the civilian aircraft is running out of time." The F-16 climbed into the darkness, its afterburners cutting through the night like twin swords. But as Kalina leveled off at 40,000 feet, she realized this mission was different from Flight 447. She wasn't alone anymore. She was part of a coordinated response team that included AWACS aircraft, electronic warfare specialists, and even Coast Guard vessels positioned along the flight path. "Crosswind, this is Raven 3. We're the E-3 Sentry providing overwatch for this mission. We have the target aircraft on radar, heading 090 degrees, altitude 35,000 feet." The Boeing 787 appeared on her radar screen exactly where intelligence had predicted. But unlike Flight 447, this aircraft was maintaining a steady course and altitude, suggesting the flight crew was still in control despite the navigation system failure. "Raven 3, this is Crosswind. I'm going to attempt to establish communications with the target aircraft. Have you detected any hostile electronic warfare signatures?" "Crosswind, Raven 3. Negative on hostile signatures. This appears to be a system malfunction rather than an attack, but we're maintaining full electronic warfare protocols. As Kalina closed the distance to the Boeing 787, she reflected on how much had changed since Flight 447. The military response was faster, more coordinated, and better equipped. The lessons learned from that terrible night had been incorporated into doctrine, training, and technology. Civilian aircraft. This is United States Air Force fighter on your 6 o'clock position. Please respond on emergency frequency 121.5. The response came immediately, clear and professional. Air Force aircraft. This is Transpac 556. We've lost all navigation systems, but we're maintaining control of the aircraft. We're declaring an emergency and requesting vectors to the nearest suitable airport. No hijackers, no terrorist threats, no electronic warfare, just a technical malfunction that threatened 312 innocent lives. But Kalina knew that sometimes the most dangerous situations were the ones that appeared routine. Transpac 556, this is Crosswind. I'm going to escort you to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Follow my lead and maintain current altitude. As she guided the Boeing 787 toward safety, Kalina realized that her role had evolved beyond that of a combat pilot. She had become a guardian of civilian aviation, a protector of innocent lives who flew not for personal glory, but for the preservation of something greater than herself. The mission was routine, but the responsibility was immense, and she was ready for it. The Boeing 787 touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at 5:45 hours, its 312 passengers, and crew unaware that they had been escorted to safety by the most famous pilot in the United States Air Force. As Kalina watched the aircraft taxi to the terminal, she felt the familiar satisfaction of a mission accomplished, but also the weight of responsibility that came with her reputation. Crosswind, this is Overlord. Outstanding work on the escort mission. Transpac 556 is safely on the ground with no injuries reported. The debrief would be routine, a simple navigation system failure that had been resolved through proper procedures and coordination. But Kalina knew that every mission, no matter how routine, was an opportunity to refine techniques and improve responses. As she flew back to Peterson Air Force Base, her radio crackled with a transmission that surprised her. Crosswind, this is Captain Sarah Williams, aircraft commander of Transpac 556. I wanted to thank you personally for the escort. Your presence gave us confidence during a very stressful situation. The transmission was brief, but it carried the weight of genuine gratitude. This was why she flew, not for the recognition or the media attention, but for moments like this, when her skills and training made a difference in the lives of innocent people. Back at Peterson, Kalina found a message waiting on her desk from the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Major Petrov, your exceptional performance over the past year has been noted at the highest levels. We're recommending you for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel and assignment as Director of Aviation Security at the Pentagon. The promotion was significant, but the assignment was even more important. As Director of Aviation Security, she would be responsible for implementing the lessons learned from Flight 447 across the entire military and civilian aviation sectors. It was a chance to transform her personal experience into systematic improvements that would protect thousands of lives. But before she could accept the assignment, there was one more mission to complete. The Air Force had scheduled her to speak at the Air Force Academy, addressing the next generation of pilots about leadership, courage, and the meaning of service. The Academy's auditorium was packed with cadets, their faces showing the mixture of excitement and nervousness that came with the prospect of becoming military pilots. Kalina stood at the podium, looking out at the future of American aviation, and felt the weight of responsibility to prepare them for the challenges ahead. When I was your age, she began, I thought being a pilot was about proving myself to others. I thought success meant earning the respect of my peers and advancing through the ranks. I was wrong. The auditorium was completely silent, every cadet hanging on her words. Being a pilot isn't about proving yourself, it's about serving others. Every time you climb into a cockpit, you're accepting responsibility for something greater than yourself. You're becoming a guardian of innocent lives, a protector of the values we've sworn to defend. She paused, thinking about Flight 447 and the countless missions that had followed. Some of you will face situations where you have to make impossible choices. You'll have to decide between your own safety and the safety of others. You'll have to act without perfect information, under extreme pressure, with lives hanging in the balance. In those moments, remember that courage isn't